Hey guys, it's Steve from Featherlightstudio, and today we're talking about my top 5 live performance features of the amazing Yamaha YC series stage keyboards. Let's check it out. So today we're working on a YC88. That's the 88-note fully weighted version of all 3 of the models. But everything that we do here today is going to apply to all 3 since they have exactly the same operating system. This has gotten some recent firmware updates that have just made this thing an incredible live performance beast. And that's really the purpose of these videos, is to cover some of the most fun live performance features that the YC series have. Coming in at number 5 on our live performance features is our duplicate main audio DI outputs. So this first trick may not seem like a big deal, but I guarantee you, if you do any live performance at all, especially in a worship environment, or on a stage where they're taking your send to front of house and you have your own setup that's different. So those are direct DI outputs from the keyboard itself, in addition to the 1/4-inch instrument outputs as well. And that means you don't have to buy a whole bunch of these guys. And that's a significant savings because these guys add up quick. Good DI boxes can cost several $100s, especially when you start talking about stereo DIs. And if you're a keyboard player, it's definitely going to be stereo DIs. And so that in and of itself makes this a huge advantage because it means you don't have to worry about whether they have them, whether you got to bring them. And if you do, did theirs work? Do yours work? Are they, do you have dirty pots or settings that don't work? Have they been banged around a lot like these guys have? This duplicate output comes directly out of the back of the YC, sounds great, and allows you to plug directly into the front of house. And it is well worth the cost of it just alone because it really saves you, especially if you have your own keyboard rig and you want your sound to be exactly the way you want it. You don't want to have to worry about your sound going from your stuff to the front of house and that being independent, which means a much more advanced keyboard and mixer rig on your part. This is quick and dirty, and it's right out the back of the instrument. Number 4 on our live performance features is assigning sound parameters to the YC's physical hardware. One of the things that the YC series keyboards are best at is assigning controllers to individual sounds. And it's one of the things that makes this such an incredibly flexible live performance board, especially in a stage environment or even a worship team environment where you're working with a couple of different kinds of sounds at the same time and you want to be able to blend them in real time, especially if you're a standing keyboard player. Now, this is a really important thing because as a standing keyboard player, what that means is you're always standing on probably your left leg and you're controlling the hold pedal with your right foot. So you're kind of doing, this sort of hop shuffle thing, which means you're not going to be controlling a lot of other foot pedals at the same time you're controlling the hold pedal. And this is where real-time control becomes a really important thing, especially in a worship team environment or a live stage environment where a lot of times you're coming up from total darkness until the stage lights come up or until the sermon begins or whatever. And it's really handy, especially in those environments, to have control of the sound on a really obvious controller that you can grab by feel and know that that's going to control exactly what you think it is. So in this particular environment, we have a regular piano on our keys A engine. So and then on the keys B engine, we have a pad. These are pretty typical sound combinations, especially, for example, like in a worship team environment. And in this scenario, we want to control that analog pad with something besides a foot pedal. We could step between key A and B engines and then control the volume that way. We could reach across with our left hand so that we can continue to use the hold pedal. Because on the YC, the bulk of the controls are on the right-hand side here. But it would be nice to be able to control that with something really obvious that isn't in this sort of instrument cluster here, especially in total darkness. So thankfully, the YC makes this incredibly easy to do. So in this example, we're going to assign the modulation lever to the sound of our analog pad. And to do that, we simply go to Settings, go down to Controllers, we go to the Modulation Lever option, and then we simply choose Assign. From here, we don't have to step through menus or do anything like that. We simply have to grab the knob that we want the modulation controller to affect, and it auto maps it instantly. We back out of here, and now we have complete real-time control of our background pad, but it's on a really obvious and easy to find controller right here on our left hand. In this next example, we're going to take the exact same approach, but instead of controlling one of the YC's internal sounds, we're going to control one of the effects parameters, and we're going to use one of the YC's physical controllers again to do it. Let's say a standard kind of mini Moog sound like this. And we want to be able to drive that into a totally different kind of sound altogether. We want to be able to morph that into like a lead guitar sound. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a distortion effect on our first effects device of keys A. And then we're going to go to Settings, and we're going to go down to Controllers, down to Modulation Lever. And under the Assign tab, we're going to move the knob that controls the depth effect. And instantly, like we showed you before in the previous example, it auto maps to the modulation lever. So now when we back out of here, we have our regular mini Moog sound, but now we can use the modulation lever to fade it into a completely different sound altogether. Number 3 on our top 5 live performance features is building combination layers and sounds. So let's expound on that idea a little bit. A lot of times in a band ensemble, especially like a 4-piece where there's drums, bass, guitar, and keyboards, the keyboard player is expected to cover a lot of ground, especially where the bed tracks are concerned. So let's build a patch that has 3 completely different, independent of each other sound categories that we're going to play in real time. So the first one we're going to start with is basically just our comping sound, our Rhodes sound. All right, we're going to use that as our main sound. And then we need to add an organ to that. But we don't want the organ to be playing every time we play the Rhodes sound or the comping sound. So let's choose an organ sound. And instead, we're going to have our foot controller control the volume of it. So we're going to go to Settings. We're going to go down to Controllers. We're going to go to Foot Controller 1 and then Assign. And now all we need to do is choose any or touch any of the organ parameters here in our organ section. So we're just going to move our volume knob. And now our foot controller, when we back out of here, is going to control the volume of our organ. And this is really the way a traditional organ is set up anyway, where the volume is in control of the dynamics of the performance and you can swell in and out. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to create a brass patch that we can use for dynamic hits on top of that. But we want the brass sound to be controlled by another controller as well. We don't want it playing while we're playing the Rhodes sound. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go to Settings, down to Controllers. We're going to go to the modulation lever and hit Assign. And now we're going to choose the parameter that we want the modulation lever to control. So in this case, it's the volume of that sound. Our keys B sound is where our brass patch is going to be. Our Rhodes is on keys A, our brass is on keys B, and then it auto maps that. We simply move our modulation lever, just like our previous example, and we get our brass sound. So now when we turn the other sounds back on, we have our basic comping sound. Number 2 on our top 5 live performance features list is controlling external sound modules. One of the things the YC series keyboards are really good at doing for live performance is integrating additional synthesizers or sound modules into your setup without requiring any additional hardware and mixing all of it down into just the outputs of the YC. So let's go through how to hook up both of these boards together. In this particular case, we have a dual keyboard setup and we want to control all of it from the YC. Here we're using a standard 5-pin MIDI cable, and that's going to be plugged into the output of the MIDI section of the YC88. And then we're going to plug the other end into the input MIDI section of the MOX F8. Next, we take the right and left analog outputs of the MOX F8, and we plug those into the analog input section of the YC88. Paying attention to the right and left input arrangements, we want to make sure that we keep that stereo field intact. So once you've made all the connections between both of the boards, you just have to set the gain setting on the back. And I found it's easier just to have the gain setting on the YC all the way up and then move the slider here. So let's adjust that first. And then we'll bring it up to taste to match our board. So here's the YC. So at the YC setting all the way up, that's line level. And since these boards are line level matched with this slider almost all the way up, those are really close to unity gain, which means I'm not going to be overdriving anything into the YC, which is really important. We don't want to change the gain staging between the two boards at all, if possible. We'd like both of them to be at unity gain, so they're as clean and as quiet and noise-free as possible. So now the entire setup here all goes to the outputs on the back of the YC. In this example, we're going to be using 3 of the 16 available tone modules from our multi-timbral MOX F8. So the first one, which is going to be on its own MIDI channel, is going to be kind of a nylon string guitar. And then the second tone generating module is going to be used to create kind of a light string pad. And then the third one is going to be to create a bass sound, and that's going to be, that particular zone is going to be from about F2 down. So we're going to be using 3 of the 4 zones that the YC88 can produce for its external keyboard control to produce or manipulate the sounds of the MOX from. And then on the YC88, we're going to be using the Keys A engine to create a CFX kind of Yamaha piano. And then on the Keys B engine, we're going to be using an analog pad. And then we're going to be using a foot controller that's assigned to the filter so we can open and close the filter of the pad. So all the zones, including the sounds Key A and B engines on the YC, put it all together and it sounds like this. And all of that information is going to be mixed down to the YC stereo output and controlled from the YC master volume control on the face of the YC. Now this keyboard could be an external module that's maybe in a rack. We're still controlling 100% of it and all of the volumes with just the YC, because the YC's master keyboard control features are pretty extensive and far, far too involved to go into with just one video. That would be a series of videos. But the ability to use all those zones in any combination of split or layer that we need to control external keyboards and sound modules makes this an incredibly flexible live setup. And coming in at number 1 on our top 5 live performance features for the YC series of keyboards is iOS and PC-based integration. All you really need to do is look at the face of the instrument and you can tell this was really designed for live performance. Nearly every one of the sound and effects-based parameters can be altered immediately by simply grabbing a knob or a slider or a dial. But I have to say, My number one feature for live performance has got to be its deep and detailed integration with iOS and PC-based applications. If you want to turn your YC into a fully fledged multi-track audio workstation, all you need is an iPad and Steinberg's Cubasis application. If you want to make sweeping soundscapes and creations and have complete control over them in a live performance or maybe a worship team environment, its ability to interface with MainStage is unparalleled. If you want to take advantage of all of the sound creation applications that are out there and expand the sound set on the keyboard itself, all you really need is an iPad and a USB cable, because it has a built-in audio interface that's high resolution that allows you to interface directly with an iPad with super low latency and use all of those sound creation applications like Module and Sample Tank and all of those directly with the YC. And if you want to save your own sound creations and trade them and discuss them with other people, you can use Yamaha's own Soundmondo app, which basically takes all of that musical creativity and puts it in a social media environment. In this example, we're going to be controlling some sound modules inside of our iPad with the YC. And this is a really straightforward procedure to set up. You're basically just using a regular MIDI cable, a USB MIDI cable that you've got probably a bunch lying around. These are very common. It's USB-B on one side and A on another. If you're using a modern day iPad that takes a USB-C connection, you might need an adapter that simply goes from USB-A to USB-C on the other side. We simply plug the cable into the YC's USB output, and the other end of it goes straight into the iPad. And if you have an older iPad, you might need Apple's Lightning to USB camera connection kit. Once the connections are made, the Apple iOS device instantly recognizes it and makes your connection with ultra-low latency so that you can perform as if the sounds were on board the YC to start with. Because the YC series keyboards have a built-in audio interface, the audio from the iOS is digitized and mixed with the audio stream of the YC88, and all comes out on the main outputs. And all of that is controlled by the YC's master volume knob. As we saw previously, the YC is capable of generating up to 4 completely independent MIDI zones, all with detailed and complex MIDI information for the apps that can receive it, allowing you to build complex and creative layers with the internal sounds of the YC or in place of them altogether. A huge advantage here is that we don't need to use those on-screen iOS controls. We can use those same YC series powerful controllers to control our iOS sounds as well. We go to Settings and go down to Controllers and then go down to Modulation lever and Assign. And then we spin the dial all the way to the very end, and the last controller feature is USB Audio Volume. From here, we can control completely our external iOS modules and sounds. This allows us to treat all of our iOS-based sound-generating modules and the PC-based ones as well, the same way we would treat our MIDI-based external sound modules. This allows us to create a very powerful and very flexible live performance or worship-based setup. So there you have it. That's my top 5 live performance features of the Yamaha YC series of keyboards. There's way too much stuff that this does to ever cover in a short video. So if you guys have tips and tricks of your own you'd like to share, please leave them in the comments below. I think it helps everybody when we kind of spread this stuff around. Hey, if you learned something or if this was helpful in any way, please hit the subscription and notification bells. It really does help keep the channel going. Be creative, stay safe, and we'll catch you guys in the next video.